Hi friends, Molten here and welcome back to the video. Today's game is one I played against fellow teammate and Australia's #1 player Anton Smirnov whilst travelling in Thailand in 2018 on a bus from Cha Am to Bangkok. And mind you, it was a blindfold game and it was just for fun, but I found it in a database and it found it super interesting and maybe worth showing. Also the fact that we've been looking at a lot of King's Gambit videos lately, so I hope you guys enjoy the video. So the game started as a King's Gambit, of course, which went e4, e5, pawn to f4, pawn takes, bishop to c4. So we have the bishop's gambit, which is one of my favorite ones, although knight f3 is perfectly fine as well. Knight f6, a very popular response. A lot of people like to play this move. Knight c3, and again bishop b4, which is the same move which was played by IM Gary Lane against me when I went for my final IM norm. Here a good move for white is the move pawn to e5, hitting the knight, which has no squares, and black again responds with the move pawn to d5, challenging the bishop in the center, a very good counter-attacking move. Bishop to b5 check, and black blocks the check with the move pawn to c6. Now if knight f to d7, then we can just capture this pawn on d5, hitting the bishop, followed by knight takes f4, gives white a very pleasant position. So after c6, pawn takes on f6 again, still following that game. Queen to e2 check. My opponent this time played the move king to f8, and now there's a bunch of different moves that I could play here because white's attacking a lot of these weakened pawns. I opted for what I thought was the trickiest one, which was the move queen to e5, and I saw all these threats with pawn takes g7, queen takes here, knight takes here. I thought this would be the most difficult to work out, especially in a blindfold. My opponent took here an f6 with the pawn. If queen takes, then I'll just trade everything and black will end up in an endgame with a very bad pawn structure. Most likely I'll win a couple of them back anyway. Very hard to defend this. So g takes, queen takes f4 was played, knight c6. So objectively black is fine, but there's a lot to defend here, and there's potentially a lot of tactics for white as well. Here I should have perhaps thrown in the move queen h6 to force the king to g8. After king g8, then maybe move my knight to e2 or knight to f3. This looks a lot safer than what I opted for, but in the game I didn't really mind. I did see the queen check on e7, but I didn't mind moving the king across. This is very typical King's Gambit way of playing anyway. Here instead of going with king f2, I opted for the king to d1 because I wanted to bring the rook to this square, and I thought the king was a lot safer on d1 than it is on f2. Instead of queen e7, I think rook g8 might have been also a much better move for black. Going for rook g4 just before I'm able to castle, and I think this might have given me a lot more problems. Despite the fact that I am able to castle here after rook here, check and king g8, I feel that black's position is totally fine and there's no way to really break through on that side. Instead queen e7 check, king d1, bishop takes. I took back with the d pawn in order to develop my bishop. It might be tempting to take back with the b pawn to play bishop a3, but I think this is probably the correct way of playing it. I should also have thrown in queen h6 here probably to force the king again to g8 and then take back, because we see that rook g8 is going to cause a lot of problems later on in the game. So after d takes c3, bishop goes to e6. Again, rook g8 is a good move, but we have bishop takes bishop e6, rook e8, rook e1, rook g8, queen h6, king to e8, and rook to e2, just defending this pawn here. And we reach a middle game again with opposite color bishops, but this time black has very bad pawn structure, but black has a lot of play, especially along this open g file, so white has to be very careful here. So knight e5, interesting move. The idea is that black is offering to undouble his pawns at the and improve his position this way. We shouldn't take it, of course, because there's bishop g4 check, so it just doesn't work. So I opted for the move queen takes h7 here, which is actually, in hindsight, not the safest move. Probably should just go bishop e3, knight g4, queen f4 is perfectly fine. But I saw some complications, especially this sacrifice, which you'll see after queen h7, king to d7, and the whole idea in this position was that I play this move, rook takes e5. Pawn takes and knight takes e5, king c7, and bishop f4. And it looks like I have a lot of threats. At least I saw that it's very hard for black to get out of all these threats, and there's a lot of attacking ideas, especially along these dark squares, that black needs to watch out for. Of course, king b6 here is the best move, and this would remove a lot of the threats. I was intending to play queen d3 here and maybe go queen d4 at some point. I still thought it was quite tricky with a4 and so on, so I was happy to play this position out. Instead, my opponent went for queen f6. I played the move pawn to g3, and there's a lot of tactics here which I had to analyze, because initially I thought queen takes on f4 was black's main idea, and after takes, rook check here and taking here and going for the double rooks. But of course I can see now, unblindfolded, that pawn to f5 is completely winning and none of these ideas work. But it's definitely worth spending some time to check that over. Otherwise, white has a lot of discovered checks myself, which black needs to watch out for. Knight g4 doesn't work here, by the way, because queen takes f4 is always a threat. So black played the move rook h8. So no knight g4. I played the move queen d3. Rook takes h2 is coming next. First black moves out of the way because knight g4 there might actually be a threat. Queen d4 was played. So apparently queen takes b5 is a little bit stronger than queen d4. It does very similar things. Queen d4, rook takes h2. b6 here would have been very good for black. Defends the c5 square. But rook takes h2. Queen c5 check. King goes to d8. Queen goes to f8 check. King c7. It's still quite tricky. I thought it was very safe to take the rook there. I didn't see any forced mates or anything. The king can sort of walk up the board if I really have to, and it seems okay. So I went for queen takes a8, rook h1 check, king went to d2, and then black didn't take the rook, so black just checked because now knight g4 is coming. So rook h2 check, king goes to e3, black played the move king to b6 here, but now we're up a piece, so white is doing very well, of course. Queen f8, bishop f5 was played by black, and here I played the move pawn to a4, and my opponent resigned. So the whole point of a4 is that I was actually threatening something next move, which funnily enough, if we played another move here, could possibly have ended in me getting forfeited, because after a4 my next idea was to play the move queen to b4 with check, and then possibly king a6, queen b5 mate. Of course this idea doesn't work at all, and I think maybe both of us actually forgot that there was a pawn on b5 entirely. So if we played on a couple more moves, the game could have been very different, because in my head I definitely did not see the pawn on b5. For example, here black can play the move pawn to d4, but it doesn't quite work because after king takes d4 there's just not enough checks here for black, and after rook d2 is not working, there's no queen checks, and queen c5, queen takes is coming next. So this game was just for a little bit of fun. It was a very interesting game considering it was blindfold and also King's Gambit. So I hope you guys enjoyed this game, and catch you guys on the next video. Take care.